needlessly murdered her former co-workers, it's because this was the final pass of several attempts to adjust her character and make her a bit more likable. Apparently, every previous version of Angela just never felt right, and even this one to me still doesn't feel great. When time came to begin writing the next Ratchet & Clank game, Angela was quietly dropped out of this fear that they would run into similar issues with her character yet again. Parts of the Ratchet fanbase did not take that well, and the character has been a source of, frankly, really dumb controversy ever since, including internet forum debates that persisted for years about whether she was even a Lombax or not, complaints about why she didn't have a tail when it was always pretty clear to me that her lack of a tail is why she's so clumsy, and a whole other slew of things. It's to the point that in 2018's Ratchet & Clank art book, the studio straight up apologizes to the fanbase about Angela. Thankfully, this chunk of the game, meandering as it might be narratively, is probably the strongest string of levels to play in the entire game. That stealth path at the testing facility is a really neat twist on players' expectations of what Ratchet gameplay would be at this point in the game, similar to the section in Ratchet 1 that does the same sort of thing, except here you actually have health and stronger weapons, so if you do want to go in guns blazing, you're less likely to die. This section, however, does end with probably the most excessive sequence of padding in any Ratchet game that I can think of. Because this monitor is broken, Ratchet uses a new glider gadget that he found earlier to follow this repair bot through a beautiful, conceptually awesome section, only for the robot to just kind of leave and let you fix the monitor yourself, and then when you teleport back, the TV bribes you before it'll play the cutscene.
Now, let's get the goods on that experiment. What the?
If you wish to progress in the game, it costs as little as $1 a month over at patreon.com/thegoldenbolt.
I think I see the problem.
That's it. This galaxy blows.
The glider item is only used 3 times in the entirety of Going Commando. Once here, once when you obtain it, and one more time near the end of the game. On the bright side, it doesn't overstay its welcome this way, but on the not so bright side, it actually still kind of does. The last glider section in particular can be pretty tough on your first couple playthroughs. In fact, Insomniac apparently received some very angry hate mail from an infuriated parent about that very section. Visually, the glider areas are just incredibly cool changes of pace and scenery from the main gameplay, but since so much as a scrape will kill you, you don't really get to appreciate them as much while you're playing, as you'll be too busy focusing on controlling your momentum, not pulling up too quickly because you'll lose all momentum and die, but also not swinging down too quickly and building too much speed up and then also dying. Plus, if you're a completionist, this section contains a health upgrade vial in the meanest spot possible. I remember this being one of the first things that I had to Google for any video game ever, because the game expects you to swing up with precision so perfect that you'll think it's just not possible, perfectly hug these corners and walls as you do a 180, and finish yourself up with just the right swing so that you can grab the health upgrade and then probably immediately die afterwards. I remember back in 2003, this wasn't even the recommended way to do this online. I figured that out myself. Instead, some players suggested that you do the entire glider section and then somehow spin around and do the whole thing in reverse just to get that one little health upgrade. No thanks. The second path here on this planet was for at least a few years used within the studio as the shining example of how to design a fun Ratchet & Clank level, as it's got a great combination of challenging and satisfying enemy placements, while still making ample use of gadgets like the slingshot and dynamo, and even sneaking in a platinum bolt that requires unique use of one of the weapons. That weapon is the Spider-Bot glove, which you actually can't buy until the next planet afterwards. The Spider-Bot is a spiritual successor to the Visibomb, throwing out a little remote-controlled spider that can damage enemies by exploding, and can also press switches tucked away in corners, behind walls, or in vents which Ratchet couldn't otherwise reach. Outside of using it for collectibles, it's not all that useful for most playstyles, but variety is always appreciated. The only weapon we unlock for purchase here on this planet is a standard rocket launcher, but it's here, roughly halfway into this game, that we find the first armor vendor in Going Commando as well, allowing us to reduce Ratchet's incoming damage with new choices of armor. It's at this point in Going Commando that the money starts to get a little bit tight, as you'll have several increasingly expensive weapons to choose from, and the Spider-Bot, which is worth like 50 cents in a used napkin, and also now some incredibly expensive armor upgrades. If you went right to the weapons vendor and grabbed either a rocket launcher or another weapon you were behind on before you saw this fancy new armor vendor, well, you're out of luck for the time being. Thankfully, the other 3 times in this game that we find armor vendors, you'll discover that you can buy a later suit of armor without having to buy the prior ones first. So, I usually skip the first upgrade or two because why would I blow 25,000 bolts on 33% damage reduction when I can just wait and cut my damage in half or even more? At the end of this combat path, we return to the spherical world gameplay introduced earlier, but this time as Giant Clank because, in case you forgot, Clank can turn into a giant robot. It's pretty cool. Of the 3 times we see Spherical World in Going Commando, 2 of them are these Giant Clank boss fights. First, we fight the Thugs for Less leader here, in the process destroying the city so hard that the Man of Steel himself would be proud, and later we can fight an optional flying saucer boss to obtain the Mapper, highlighting secret areas on the world map. As I said in the Ratchet & Clank 1 retrospective, I've never been one for the Giant Clank gameplay beyond the initial, wow, this is awesome, I had back when I was, I don't know, 8? Giant Clank gameplay on a spherical world, though? No, it's still kind of just here. Like, it's incredibly cool that it exists, but I would rather have seen some more consequential use of the globe gimmick in proper Ratchet gameplay, since we only really fight a handful of enemies during that first introduction to these spherical worlds. We would have to wait another year to see these spherical worlds reach their logical conclusion in a full, traditional Ratchet level. After beating the Thug leader again, we get to refill our rapidly depleting wallets a little bit as, interestingly, the game throws all of its maxi games at us in rapid succession yet again at this point in the game. Down the main story route, we've got space combat challenges at the disposal facility, and here on the planet Jobo, we have both the completely optional second set of hoverbike races and a whole second arena where we obtain 2 new gadgets. The gravity boots, which allow us to scale magnetic pathways on walls and ceilings, and the infiltrator, that second gadget that allows us to open doors, which I mentioned earlier. And on the way to that arena, we also obtained the levitator from that shady rhino salesman from the first game, except now he's really tall for some reason. This gadget allows you to gain a ton of altitude and cross vast distances, provided that your very limited fuel doesn't run out at least. Outside of the levitator needing fuel, this thing only has a marginally different core function from the glider, with both of them acting as situational, flight-based tools that require perfection thanks to one-hit deaths. Since both the levitator and the glider are only used a handful of times each, there's little reason why we needed multiple half-baked gadgets other than for variety's sake. Oddly enough, both even act as prototypes for greatly improved gadgets that are introduced much later on in this franchise. I don't even think I would mind having both if they didn't make you pay for the levitator. At least the glider was free, but I hope this thing's worth like 20,000 bolts to you. Actually, I hope you even had 20,000 bolts, because there's a decent chance that you might not if you bought either the Spider Bot or this planet's other new weapon, the fantastic Plasma Coil. Or, again, if you bought any of the other weapons that you might be behind on. There's a good chance that you've skipped a few guns by this point, since there are more planets that introduce 2 weapons in this game than there are that only introduce 1. This is part of why the game tosses a bunch of side challenges at you in rapid succession, because Insomniac clearly wasn't sure yet how to balance things like weapon costs, how many bolts you earn per level, experience earned from defeating enemies, how quickly a weapon should be made obsolete, and all of that boring stuff that we as players never think about unless it's negatively affecting us. Hell, at this point in the series, every type of enemy was still being programmed on a level-by-level basis rather than at a more global level, even recurring ones like the Thugs for Less grunts that function identically from mission to mission. Really, that's true for everything in this game, from enemies to teleports. All of what you see was put together individually, even if that meant copying and pasting the code again and again and again. Just about the only things that weren't done this way are, oddly enough, the explosions, because every explosion in Going Commando is a permutation of one single explosion effect, with the parameters able to be easily modified and repurposed quickly. Since levels would often be assigned to specific programmers, designers, and artists, and made from scratch in 5-week batches, there wasn't enough of a focus at the very outset on doing a little bit of work ahead of time to save everybody a lot of time later. On one hand, this leads to those little moments like the thugs posing as mannequins or playing rock, paper, scissors before they're alerted. That little extra bit of love that goes in when a developer truly makes something their own. But on the other, so much work was being done to fine-tune this game at a micro level that it was perhaps a little bit too late once everybody stepped back and realized, oh, yeah, we've got 2 gadgets that open doors, and we've got 2 flying gadgets, and we really aren't using any of these gadgets much at all. And wait, why are there 2 wrench upgrades when we're trying to get people to stop using the wrench? It can almost feel like there were too many cooks in the kitchen at times, even if that led to some of those more charming individual moments that might not sneak into a more optimized development structure. For example, the Megacorp Armory features a robot Fizzwidget guiding tourists through the company's history, showcasing some of its early rocket prototypes. Not only can Ratchet relentlessly kill these tourists again and again and again, hundreds of times over, to the point that the help desk tells you it's alerting the authorities, players can also damage and destroy each of these rockets, which have different effects. A few of them crumple and just kind of explode, while one of them will lift off for just a second before crashing back down, and the final one is a successful and complete liftoff going all the way into space until it crashes back down later in the level and kills one of the more difficult enemies. That last one I never noticed until this most recent set of playthroughs. It's amazing how many new things you can catch each time you play these games. Nobody wrote one of these into the game's script or anything. This was just a designer having a fun time at work. Although, now that I mentioned the script, I should point out that in the HD Collection version of Going Commando, the Fizzwidget tour guide actually glitches out and doesn't say anything where he would have said flavor dialogue during each stop on this tour. That's one of a good number of smaller bugs exclusive to this HD collection, the most noteworthy being Ratchet's helmet during cutscenes being a bit larger than it should be and seemingly floating above his head. I'll talk in more detail about why the HD collection runs into so many smaller issues when we get to Ratchet and Clank 3, as that game tends to get the brunt of it. The worst that we get here is the helmet bug and an otherwise completely playable game, at least on PS3. The Vita versions have their own fair share of larger issues, including strafing being locked to what feels like one specific spot on the top right side of the handheld's back touchpad, which in my experience means that you're just not going to strafe in that version, which also means probably don't play that version. At the end of the main path at the armory is Angela returning by way of a conveniently placed TV, like I mentioned earlier, and this scene also features what I'm certain has to be the most subtle Final Fantasy reference I have ever seen. Ratchet suddenly gets super serious talking about the dangers of the proto-pet completely out of nowhere, and James Arnold Taylor delivers a line right out of his performance in Final Fantasy X.
This could be our last chance.
This may be our last chance.
There is no chance in hell that was unintentional. This planet also features an even more optional tertiary path where we meet a Captain Quirk superfan, to whom we can later trade a Captain Quirk statue in exchange for an increased pickup range for bolts. After that, we'll never see this guy again. Yeah, I promise. Never. The Silver City level right before Ratchet and Clank get arrested is one of my favorite levels in the entire Ratchet and Clank franchise. Just a constant barrage of combat encounters against thugs for less, which probably should have been assigned, now that I think about it, for Ratchet and Clank to turn back around. It's got the best levitator section in the entire game. Driving, moving traffic. There's an awesome grind rail through a construction site. Fights where you're running down the side of a building fighting enemies while using gravity boots. Enemies that use their gravity boots to rush you across a spiral magnet track. This dude breaking the gravity boots and ascending to space. And a secret teleporter that only works at exactly 3 a.m. The level just doesn't let up from start to finish, and the subsequent jailbreak level holds that pace as Ratchet and Clank split up and make their way out of the prison ship, the very same ship that Ratchet drove into at the start of Going Commando. This is the sort of eureka moment for Clank gameplay for me, at least up until this point in the series. The gameplay isn't any different from the previous instances of Clank gameplay, but alternating between Clank sections and the solo Ratchet sections that follow gives just the right feeling of forward momentum that Clank's levels usually tend to halt. Instead, the pace halting here is performed by some levitator sections above rising and falling lava, where we can meet the plumber, who's apparently the only plumber in the universe. Why is he so far out of his own galaxy? And we run into Angela's convenient TV placement yet again.
Hey, who's it?
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
With Angela captured, the duo chases the Thugs for Less fleet and powers their way through the gang's base of operations. Usually this Thugs for Less planet is considered the biggest difficulties fight in the game, and rightfully so, but man, I just love going through it. Fighting hordes and hordes of thugs for less goons, tanks, and choppers, watching pieces of their armor flying off as I damage them, watching the goons use the flaming carcasses of the tanks that I just destroyed as cover, and getting ambushed again and again. It's exactly the kick the game needed right as it was starting to slog again not that long prior. It's a good thing, too, that this is one of the few planets with an armor vendor in case you want to upgrade, and it's placed right before the hardest part of the level, too. Of course, if you've purchased the shield charger weapon, you may not need that armor, as this bubble shield will allow you to take a good number of extra hits before it breaks, and then before you would take more damage. For players that do struggle, though, this will probably be the first time in Going Commando that the game's difficulty tuning system starts working. See, across the entire Ratchet & Clank franchise, there's a pretty secret system in place that will give you a break if you die a few consecutive times. Perhaps it'll spawn one or two fewer enemies, or it'll give them a bit less health and a few more bolts, or your weapons will start packing a bit more of a punch or experience a little faster. Sometimes an extra health crate will spawn next to a nearby stack of crates. Likewise, if you're just blowing through the levels and not having any trouble at all, the game will try to rubber band itself to keep you just challenged enough that you're progressing, but still being forced to use all the different weapons and experience all of the game's feedback loops in simultaneous synergy. It's subtle enough that I don't believe anybody noticed it for almost a decade until former Insomniacs Mike Stout and Tony Garcia revealed this existed in 2011 during their developer Let's Plays of Ratchets 2 and 3. There are many other examples of this sort of nudging for the benefit of the player, both in Going Commando and beyond. Ammo crates, to name one of these, don't decide which ammunition is contained within until the moment you break them, at which point the game gives you some combination of either ammo for the weapon for which you're lowest on ammo, and or the weapon you've been using most recently. For the regular crates, all of the crates and enemies in every level tend to add up to give you a specific total of bolts per level, and if you miss a stack of crates, the game will automatically add those bolts to later stacks to make sure that you're never too far behind where the game wants you to be, and the game determines in real time what will be the most satisfying quantity of bolts to pick up for that value. It's far more satisfying if the game throws 100 pennies at you instead of 4 quarters after all. It's amazing how many little tricks are built into these games to keep you perfectly hooked all the way through, and you never think about any of them until you first hear about them. Once you know they exist, though, the games shine even brighter in that new light. The final encounter against the thug leader at the end of this level, though, could have used a bit more light on it. Dude's got another, even bigger giant mech somehow, and we're in for a city-wide fight against this seemingly unstoppable behemoth. In terms of scale, this fight is an incredible game of cat and mouse as you flee through the streets and onto rooftops, avoiding the mech's laser attacks, dodging as he throws entire spaceships at you. The works. The way the game wants you to play this fight, though, sucks. There are a couple dozen turrets mounted across these rooftops, which control simultaneously too loosely and too stiffly somehow. And once you enter a turret, the thug leader will fire homing missiles at you. Half the time you're in these turrets, you can't even hit the giant mech directly because you're focusing on shooting the homing attacks out of the air. And the turrets do such a tiny amount of damage and he breaks them so quickly and forces you to move back around the city that this turns into the world's sleepiest war of attrition. I much prefer my method, which I call using the bouncer. With the fully upgraded heavy bouncer, you can take down more than half of the mech's health just by shooting at its cankles. It's a lot more fun, and it's more reason why the bouncer is just the best. After Ratchet checks on Clank, who's been on his back the whole time, and almost forgets to save Angela, the person he was supposed to be saving, she decides she doesn't like being corporeal, and quickly sends us to the next planet, where she contacts us from yet another convenient TV. It's actually impressive how much literal screen time she gets compared to how little we see her in person. This next planet, Smold, begins the weakest act of the game, as Going Commando starts to slump to the finish thanks to crunch in part due to the game's earlier overloaded limitations. As Megacorp's main distribution facility, some parts of this level are really neat in scope, like the vast gaps between your ships forcing you to use the levitator to fly off into the distance, but in general, this level just kind of sucks thanks to the time constraints. The dynamo puzzles aren't really fun. The levitator section also isn't exactly what I would call fun, since it's just throttling with the X button and moving forward. The mutant enemies can get pretty tanky with how much damage they absorb, and the draft color palette is thematically appropriate, but it doesn't make it any less bleh to see. And then at the end, the game makes you pay 40,000 goddamn bolts to watch a cutscene. Please, stop. My family needs to eat. Did he just... This motherfucker just ate my money. What are you, some kind of goddamn vending machine at the grocery store? Fuck you. The next planet, the icy tundra on Grelbin, is one of the most infamous in the franchise thanks to the Yeti enemies that'll quickly swarm and overrun the player. This is the second of the game's wide-open crystal collecting worlds, although at first only a small lower level is accessible, not the entire thing. The Yetis were intended to act as a smaller swarming enemy, similar to the bugs that appear in the desert, but because this level was so horrendously behind schedule and the original developers didn't have the time to finish it, control was given at the last minute to programmer Tony Garcia, who only had 3 days to code the entire thing. So across 3 straight days, and presumably on just about 0 sleep, he threw away all of the work that was done already, rather than piece together whatever the previous programmer was trying to do, and as an aside, as somebody with programming experience, I've done exactly that for myself. Interpreting somebody else's code is about as bad as learning a new language. And he coded in just those 3 days everything you see in this level from scratch. And naturally, this led to some balancing issues with the Yetis. Namely, so many of them pop out at once that it slows down the game. Their attacks come out incredibly quickly and have little cooldown before they can attack again. They have way too much health, and I believe they're one of the few enemies in the game that cause touch damage. The level got so many complaints, not just from fans, but from current and future Insomniac developers, that Garcia was eventually given an award for how bad it is, and seemingly to this day, Insomniac still gives out the Snow Beast Award after most projects, the dubious honor going to whoever was responsible for the worst thing that shipped as a part of each game. Keep in mind, that sounds far worse when said aloud than the trophy is actually intended to be. The act of shipping even the worst thing in a game is still shipping something in a game. There's not anything that anybody on any team will be perfectly satisfied with, and if you get a little roasted for shipping the worst thing, you still finished it. What these previous two planets share is that each of them, along with the next planet Damosel, contain one of the 3 pieces needed to construct our final gadget in the game, the Hypnomatic. Damosel is another awesome city planet. They fight against both the protopets that are reproducing en masse because they reproduce asexually by vomiting. Yep, these Furbies are just reverse Kirby too, and the robot exterminators that are programmed to kill anything fuzzy, including, well, Ratchet. There's really not another level in the franchise that has as much clear utility as this one, that feels like an actual place that could exist. You start the level by fighting your way down a regular city street with apartments on both sides of you, with citizens fleeing around you, before battling through a park, through a bank, through grocery stores with aisles filled with protopet boxes. Oh yeah, by the way, they were shipping these living creatures in sealed cereal boxes. The grind rail track that leads to the final Hypnomatic part pushes you across a series of levitating train tracks, and the trains themselves are